To unpack the real issues affecting the Tasman nations, this is Trans-Tasman Talk. Jointly produced by the Unshackled.net and rightminds.nz. Now here's Tim Willems in Australia and Dieuwe in New Zealand.
Good evening and welcome back to Trans-Tasman Talk for our first episode of year 2020. The date is Tuesday, the 28th of January 2020. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne.
And it is 9 p.m. here in Auckland.
And I will just say from the beginning, it's good to finally chat to you again in person, Dieuwe. Obviously, we've been in communication throughout the whole month of January, but yeah, it's good to finally be face to face, and of course doing this show again, given that it was such a success since we started in September 2019.
Yes, that's right. We managed to run it for a couple of months, and we took a nice break over the summer. And it's good to see everyone back in the chat, and some of the regulars are there, which is really good. And yeah, we're ready to and excited to get the show back up and running for 2020.
Yes, we are broadcasting live on the Unshackled's YouTube channel, and we're also on the Tim Willems D-Live channel. Now, because we are on the main Unshackled channel, which is monetized, if you're participating in the live chat on the Unshackled, you can directly send through a super chat through YouTube, which Port Film Co-op, who's a fan of all of Australian alt media, he's already sent through a super chat of $2 Australian. Thank you so much. He says, "Steal, oh steal, steal my heart away." Port Film Co-op is obviously pretty excited that my colleague Steele Archer's detonation program is back. I've got a feeling that Port Film Co-op, he might have had some robotics installed upon him by the transhumanists, given his obsession. And if you check out his own channel, he's got a tribute to detonation and transhumanism.
Yes, I did manage to denounce Arthur Steele and sorry, Archer Steele and transhumanism, and I offended quite a few people, I believe. So I'm still not apologizing for that, but you know, we've got some other things to talk about tonight, and we are live on the Right Minds YouTube channel, and we're on the BFD as well, and so hello to anyone coming across from the BFD. And we also have Entropy up and running. I've posted the link in the chat, so you can do super chats to the Right Minds channel via the link in the chat.
Entropy, I finally got you onto it, and it's becoming used by more and more YouTubers who have either been demonetized or can't be monetized. Mark Collett, who we had as a guest on the Uncockables, he pioneered Entropy on his live streams, and now Nick Fuentes of America First is now using it since YouTube kicked him off their partner program for a community guidelines strike for a video he deleted.
Yes, I did hear about that, and he had to go onto D-Live as well for a week, which seems to be popular as well with the people who are not having much luck with YouTube. But yeah, so we're good to go. I hope somebody can try it out at some point and let me know if it works, and otherwise we'll try and get that fixed for the next show. But for the first time ever, we do have a working link to Entropy now, so that's good news for the show.
Now, I don't really go away over the summer holidays. I take it a bit easier, but I know that news is going to break. Of course, it's not just a 24/7, but a 365, or we're in 2020 now, so 366-day news cycle. And obviously the biggest news in Australia for much of the new year, of course, was Australia's devastating bushfire season and the politicalisation of that to whack Scott Morrison, blame it on climate change, and also whack Rupert Murdoch as well, because apparently his newspapers alone behind a paywall has managed to brainwash the Australian people into not wanting to take action on climate change, which, well, you have to have to then congratulate Rupert Murdoch if he's able to do that with, well, be the one non-left-wing media outlet and do that. That's a pretty good achievement. But I will just run through. I'll go to Wikipedia here just to run our New Zealand audience through here. So the total fatalities over this 2019-20 bushfire season has been 34, and a lot of those have been volunteer firefighters. There's been a few fire trucks that have flipped, and there was an air taker which US volunteers were on. 3 were killed. 2,779 homes lost, that is residential homes, not buildings, and hectares burnt, 18.6 million. So, and most of that is New South Wales, as you can see there. 25 of the deaths, over 2,000 of the homes lost, and just about a third of the hectares burnt were in New South Wales.
It's just absolutely astounding, the kind of devastation that these fires can, visit on a nation. But I saw on the Wikipedia link already, they're talking about climate change, and of course no mention of the the build-up of bush, the lack of backburning and other fire management and so on. And we've talked about that already a lot last year. So yeah, we had a few other things start off the year as well. Like we had World War III, which we already missed. We started the show a little bit too late for that.
What a fizzer!
It was short. But we've already moved on to the next thing. Of course, the plague has struck.
Yes, the coronavirus.
Yes, that's right. So all of those summer beers you thought you'd be drinking, it's no good.
I saw it good because obviously, for those who don't know, Corona beer, it's imported from Mexico, but it's a popular beer that's drunk in Australia and New Zealand, and so obviously there is a lot of concern about the coronavirus, but it's been open season for memers and satire magazines. I saw there was one, I can't remember which satire publication it was, that Corona changes its name to Ebola beer so it doesn't get confused.
We have some breaking news in New Zealand as well. It's going to be an election year this year, and just at 3 p.m. today, we had the news that the Prime Minister has announced the election will be on the 19th of September. It's a Saturday, like all elections in New Zealand, and there was some disagreement reportedly between the members of the government. New Zealand First wanted a later date in November, but Labour and the Greens wanted that September date, because they can get the student vote and the student volunteers to come out before the exam season starts, and all of the students decide that they can't help give free slave labor to political campaigns, and they have to focus on their studies.
And we should note for our Australian audience that it's become basically convention now that at the beginning of an election year, New Zealand has 3-year terms like Australia for the Prime Minister to announce the date of the election, even though they can, at their discretion, call it any time they want. And there's hardly ever an early election in New Zealand.
That's right, and especially with MMP, where you would expect less stable governments, it actually has not been the case. We have not had a real early election that I can remember in my lifetime. So it's quite rare, and one-term governments are very rare as well. So we shall see if if that holds and Jacinda is re-elected, or if she will enter the history books as basically the first failed prime minister in the last half a century.
As you know, with Australia, we have a bicameral parliament, and so the the elections for both houses have always got to sync up in a double dissolution election. That makes the electoral cycle even shorter because we had the double dissolution in July 2016, which means we were going for 3-year terms, but eventually we're going to lose a year on that 3-year term because because the double dissolution meant the Senate. All of the Senate went to an election after 2 years rather than a half Senate election in 3 years. So that's why our elections are more frequent. And of course, the Prime Minister keeps it a surprise when he's going to call the election, and there's always the helicopter that goes on the Prime Minister's Comcar 1 when he's heading to Yarralumla to visit the Governor General in Canberra. But yeah, it was much more sort of describe it for me when Jacinta announced it. Was it sort of a big hype, or was
No,
it...
she just announced that she was holding a post-cabinet press conference. I believe this was the first one of the year, and it had been leaked beforehand already, saying that she was going to announce this. So it was just a standard press conference, but everybody knew what to expect because the stuff leaks. So it was just quite a casual matter in New Zealand. And of course, we do actually know who the Prime Minister is going into the election, whereas in Australia you have a little bit more trouble there because you never know at any one time who the Prime Minister might be tomorrow. So it's that kind of stability that we have here in New Zealand. You definitely do not have that in Australia.
Well, I know that there's been a lot of people, particularly on the far left, criticising Scott Morrison's a response to the bushfires, which have affected nearly I would say now all states in Australia. So it's basically been forced upon him as a federal government responsibility because he's had to get the army reserves to he implemented a compulsory call-up, and I know that Twitter in the past has been good at manipulating, distorting democracy. So they've been giving it their shot, getting the hashtags trending. Not my prime minister, Libspill3. They've given Scott Morrison the nickname Scotty from marketing. They call him, because his nickname is ScoMo, they call him Smoko, and he's not the prime minister anymore. He's the crime minister because he's a climate change criminal. Get it?
Yes, very creative.
Yes. So,
and I mean, and speaking of the social media manipulation and hype, of course, we do have the coronavirus, which we already mentioned. I believe you've got some confirmed cases in Australia. We don't have any of those in New Zealand yet, and it's widely believed anyway that the Communist Party of China is lying to us, and so we don't really know what to talk about or how bad it's going to get, because the reports that are out there are either conflicting or they're from the Communist Party, and nobody should take them at their word.
Yeah, since when have communist governments ever hidden things? I mean, we only had to wait until the dissolution of the Soviet Union to find out what happened in Stalin's reign in the 30s,
Exactly.
40s, and 50s.
And even in Chernobyl, which apparently was trending in China now, this sort of China's Chernobyl or Chinobyl, that we didn't actually know what really happened to Chernobyl until after the Soviet Union collapsed as well. So it will be interesting to see how this virus develops. The New Zealand government has been a little bit slow, a little bit lax. They haven't wanted to close any of the borders to people traveling from the area. And our embassy in China reportedly was closed on at least today and yesterday. So that New Zealand citizens trapped in the quarantine zone actually don't get any help and can't escape. And that was contrasted to Australia's embassy, which was, open and actively trying to take Australians out of there.
Doesn't New Zealand have an arrangement when their embassy staff in Beijing go on holidays, they just get members of the Chinese Communist Party to fill in there? Isn't that how the arrangement works?
That's currently still under negotiation, I believe. We have some bipartisan efforts going into that at the moment.
Because this has happened to your greatest ally.
Yes, I know it's a horrible thing, and I'm sure that Jacinda will be planning a trip to Wuhan to hand out a lot of hugs and to all of the poor people affected by this tragic virus as well.
And maybe she can hug one of them with a gas mask on, and that can be made into a solo
That
mural.
could be. That could be. Even the president. I heard the president of China, Xi Jinping. He is nowhere to be seen anymore. Apparently, on the first day, he was kind of out there trying to, show some public support, and now he's hiding away in his bunker.
It doesn't exactly seem like, because even the despots of history, they still had like cute photo ops. I mean, there's photos of Hitler patting and embracing dogs, but Xi Jinping, we've seen the leaked emails where he says, show the Uyghur people in Xinjiang province no mercy. So you wonder if he's capable of empathy.
No. Well, you can get banned from China for a certain meme that I won't mention because I might want to visit China one day. But so he's not really that.
Give it up now. You're not going to get in.
They'll turn me away, you think?
You won't even get out of the Auckland airport.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sure I'll get. They'll have to. They'll look at my passport. They'll look at the screen and be like, "Oh, sorry, we have to go talk to the boss," and then I'll be stuck in limbo now. So, yes, we'll talk about that later. I see it has been asked in the chat. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But you have had Australia Day. Was it yesterday or today?
It was 2 days ago, so January 26th. Sunday was Australia Day, but then we had January 27th as the Australia Day public holiday. So the 9 to 5 workers, such as yourself, get a day off work, so nobody misses out. And it's fair to say that because the battle to save Australia Day was raging for the past decade, but I'm pretty confident to say that we've won that battle because it now has federal bipartisan support. Australia Day, because the new Labor leader Anthony Albanese, he stated his position that he wants Australia Day to remain on January 26th and called the Invasion Day culture wars counterproductive. And the former federal Labor deputy leader and shadow education spokeswoman Tanya Plibersek, she's proposed that school children recite the Australian Citizenship Pledge of Allegiance, and has said that just because you're a progressive doesn't mean you can't be patriotic. And so they're well, not good. Their Twitter base, I'm not talking about their actual real base, has just been raging.
The Twitter mob. Oh yes, ouch.
It's just another betrayal that they feel from this new Albo-led Labor Party, because he's also dumped the Labor's 45% emissions target. He and a few other Labor frontbenchers, they're trying to fall in love with coal again. So this is all part of, because Scott Morrison, he coined the term Quiet Australians. Labor are now realising, actually reading proper polls and focus groups which feature the Quiet Australians, that they're not on Twitter, they're not out on the streets protesting, gluing themselves to things. They're actually quietly getting on with their lives, raising their families, working, but they do vote every 3 years, and they voted in the May 2019 federal election.
It's quite interesting to see that bipartisan approach there towards Australia Day. We've got our sort of national holiday, Founding Day, coming up in February, and Waitangi Day commemorates the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is, like I said, basically the foundation of New Zealand, and that is at this point anyway, more contentious in that it can be used to air grievances, and especially used for attacks on the Prime Minister. So usually, especially if it's a right-wing Prime Minister, they'll go and get things thrown at them, or they'll be threatened that they won't be welcome on the Waitangi grounds and things like that. And there's all of these ceremonies that go on. But Jacinda has actually run into some trouble of her own. Because the 6th of February is not that far away now, less than 2 weeks. We're about 2 weeks away. About a week away, just over that. And she has protesters occupying Imuhato, which we have already talked about many months ago, because they've been there for nearly half a year. And this was supposed to be built by Fletcher's, and Fletcher bought this land from the previous owners and was going to build about 400 houses on it. And it's been occupied illegally. The police have refused to clear the protesters away. And Jacinda promised them that she'd resolve this at one point when she was getting on the plane to go away on one of her overseas trips. She was ambushed by reporters, and she says, "Oh no, we'll get this sorted. It'll be fine. We'll sort this out." And so they stayed put. And she still has to deliver on something, because if she does try to buy this off Fletcher, then it undermines all of the treaty settlements. So they've been going on for about 100 years or so, where historic grievances have been settled, and these are supposed to be full and final, where they don't get, they can't just relitigate this over and over again. And then the other main core part of these settlements is that private property was out of bounds. Only public land could possibly be returned, and most of it was just monetary compensation. And now if the government goes and buys private land, then that rips up 100 years of bipartisan consensus on this issue, and everyone will be coming back and saying, "Oh, hey, well, here's some private land that we want to have back." Every single tribe up and down the country could then go and say, "Oh, well, we can go and sit on this property. We can squat here," and it's basically risks the property rights of all New Zealanders.
So she's basically given into the loud mob, and she's basically enabled these type of Occupy protests. It'd be like if our state and federal government in Australia ceded to the Extinction Rebellion supergluers, and the minute you give them an inch reward bad illegal behaviour, then they're just going to be more empowered to keep taking radical action. And this is what we've seen with the left over the past decade. And it reached a fruition last year with, well, not just Extinction Rebellion in Australia, but the radical vegans who occupied the main intersection in the Melbourne CBD, invaded farms, forced farm cafes out of business. You cannot give them an inch at all, because you're just inviting. I mean, with the vegans, for example, the Labor politicians, the vast majority of them aren't vegan, but it was they're turning a blind eye to that sort of radicalization of who are on the far left of their constituency that led to that, and it's what's going to happen here as well.
Yeah. And there is what's basically stopping this from happening, and there are rumors this deal is going to go through, that, talking about an imminent deal this week, because like I said, she has, I can give a quick count of the exact number of days, but it's 9 days, basically, 9 days if she wants to settle before Waitangi Day. And the rumors are there's a deal imminent, and that the government will basically give a $45 million grant to the Auckland Council, who will then buy the land from Fletcher's, and because they paid $26 million for this, and the value of it now with the houses on it would be more than $45 million. So that's what they would settle for. But that's the taxpayers paying $45 million to keep a bit of land empty. And I'm all in favor of having some more parks and keeping these spaces not avoiding all of the ugly buildings and the buildup of infrastructure. But they're bringing more people into the country. They need more houses. They need more infrastructure. And now they're saying, "Oh no, we're not going to do this. We're going to stop 400 houses from being built," and we foot the bill. And that's just that's an absolute disaster.
And wasn't it Jacinta Ardern's one of her 2017 election policies to have more houses built because Auckland property prices, well, they're even higher than Sydney and Melbourne, and now those houses are not going to be built, and she especially wanted to build houses for low income Kiwis, and that's also been limited now. So she has basically broken an election promise.
Yeah, they were going to build so many houses. They built 200, and they've basically just cancelled 400. So they've managed to do net minus 200 houses so far. That's the election result of the government's house building program, and it's a disaster. We do have apparently Winston Peters and New Zealand First are still opposing this deal, which is the main reason it hasn't gone through yet. But the question is, will he give way in turn for something else? That's currently not known. But we do know that Winston Peters has basically said that he's the one holding this up. But now the rumors are coming through that the deal is going to happen. And looking at this land, there's a great story on the BFD from a while ago called An Objective View of Ehumato. And it lists like what's happened to this land over 150 years since the 1847. But basically this was a swampy area in Manukau, and along some of the local Maori, along with the Wesleyan Church, basically drained the area, started cultivating it. The tribes in the area eventually ended up siding with the King movement, the rebellion, and this is during the what's now commonly called the New Zealand Wars, or the Land Wars at the time by the English, which is called the New Zealand Rebellion. And these people got caught up on the wrong side of it. There's no real evidence they did much wrong, but they lost a lot of land that was confiscated from them. But again, this was dealt with in 1926, where they were compensated. A lot of the land they had previously sold into private hands. Some of the land that they had sold to English settlers was confiscated by the government and then given back and sold to different people. And so there were actually English settlers who lost land in this place as well. But eventually, in 1866, a Scottish man, Gavin Wallace, he got the land there, and his family has owned it for 150 years, nearly. And they sold it on to Fletcher's, the last little bit of this block. I mean, this was quite a huge bit of property. A lot of it has actually been basically given to the council and as a reserve. It's a really nice place, and the rest of it has been built up over the years. So, it's the kind of land that should not be under this kind of dispute, because these disputes were settled nearly 100 years ago.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter to the radical leftists, white guilt and Maori activists. They still believe that even though you do have a treaty with the Maori people, they still believe that it's not being upheld.
Yeah.
And it's obviously, in Australia, we don't have a treaty with the Indigenous people. It's obviously, our Australia Day is called Invasion Day by the left, because sovereignty was never ceded, and they always chant always was, always will be Aboriginal land, even though there is no treaty. The British settlers' relations with the Indigenous Australians is more complicated, and there were periods of peace and negotiation, cohabitation, and there were times of conflict and also bloodshed as well. The history that the left try to say in Australia is that there were all these massacres of Indigenous people that were kept in servitude, and it's the biggest Invasion Day rally is held not in where a lot of Indigenous people live, like in the remote communities in the Northern Territory or Alice Springs. It's in inner city modern Melbourne, where the Indigenous people who live there enjoy all the benefits of modern Western society, technology, health, transport. But that's where the warriors of the Aboriginal resistance, they're the organisers of the Melbourne Invasion Day in 2018. The main organiser, Tyne Onus Williams, told the crowd, "Fuck Australia, hope it fucking burns to the ground." Well, she sort of got a wish this year. And then in 2019, Australia Day, local patriot activist Ricky Turner, he stood on the steps of Flinders Street Station, which is an iconic Melbourne landmark, because the Invasion Day marches, they're allowed to go from Parliament House in Victoria down the Australia Day parade route and then go to the intersection between Swanston and Flinders Street in Melbourne, which has Flinders Street Station, then it has Federation Square, then St Paul's Cathedral, and then Young and Jackson, iconic Melbourne pub. And so Ricky T just stood there draped in the Australian flag last Australia Day 2019. He was dragged to the ground by the Invasion Day angry mob and was almost lynched before police took him out there.
And I've seen a video from Avi Yemeni this year that he was actually arrested. We're seeing we have illegal protesters in New Zealand who are not arrested. We'll talk about my own case a little bit later, but Avi Yemeni there, he was arrested, and I quote, "for his own safety." So is that a thing that you're doing in Australia now?
Well, he wasn't the only one moved on for breach of the peace. We have in Victoria, where the police can basically move you on if they believe that there's going to be a breach of the peace. You'll remember that Lauren Southern, this was in Western Sydney, she was not allowed to go into an Islamic suburb there because she would cause a breach of the peace. Well, she was going to she wasn't going to go into the local mosque.
No, that's right. Yeah.
Just go outside. But this is basically we don't have move on laws in Victoria, but the breach of the peace basically means they can move you on. And RVM,
that's an abuse. That's an abuse from. I mean, that's an old English law that's being abused by the police in this case, because that's not what that law was. You know, a breach of the peace was somebody who was causing a ruckus, not somebody who you know, I suppose could be accused of making other people cause a ruckus, which shouldn't be an offence, because you can't. There's nothing you can do if you're just walking down the street to make people angry at you, right? That's those people's fault. But the police, they know they can move the peaceful people on, and they don't want, where they get minimum resistance, that's where they'll focus their efforts.
Well, the fact that there is more Invasion Day protesters in the CBD than actually people who love Australia, that's why it's easy for them to move on the small number of patriots who do converge on the Melbourne CBD on Australia Day. Yes, Avi Yemeni, he now what he does currently is he attends public demonstrations in Melbourne and interviews attendees. He does this at both left and right-wing demonstrations, and of course the left absolutely hate him, think he's a fascist, and so
that's what the Nazi Jew.
Yes, and so there's always lots of confrontations where they're yelling stuff at him, and it makes for great YouTube vision, but it's not exactly a constructive conversations here. I won't play any of the videos, but this is just a report I did today. Arrests on Australia Day in Melbourne 2020, because Neil Erickson, who's another prominent... I'll just go... This is a...
Go on.
I'll just go through this first before I get to... Because Neil Erickson was also moved on for breach of the peace, but this footage here uploaded by Peter V, who's a fan of all of our content. None of the protesters knew who he was, so he was able to sneak in to the Invasion Day protest. And this was their slogan, hashtag for the year, pay the rent, 250 years in arrears, not negotiable. And see the dollar sign there, the amount, infinity.
Yeah, infinity. Oh, well, it's good to know that they'll be satisfied with, everything.
Yeah, I actually did an article on the eve of Australia Day where I actually analysed, are we paying the rent? And it turns out that according to the federal government's own budget figures, spending per capita, it's 2 to 1 in favour of Indigenous Australians. Indigenous Australians get twice as much spent on them by the federal government than non-Indigenous Australians. So I think we are paying the rent if you accept the
And
premise of that.
Is that outright, or is that per capita, or
This is federal government per capita in the federal budget.
Oh, yeah, good.
Yeah.
I was going to say outright would be a huge amount. Per capita sounds better. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is our interview, The Unshackled with Ricky T last year, and this is from Neil Erickson's Senator Slayer channel. He tried to emulate his mate Ricky T's Australia Day stand last year. I think he was draped in the exact same flag that Ricky T had. So he just stood on the steps of Flinders Street Station. The police tried to get him to move on for breach of the peace. Neil, of course, refused, and so they handcuffed him and were dragged him down the steps until Neil said, "Okay, I'll just walk to the divvy van," and they drove him across town. The Proud Boys. This video has been re-uploaded. I'll fix that up after the show. But the Proud Boys, there was about 20 of them that stood on the steps of Flinders Street Station at different times to Neil Erickson. They had blue shirts on that said Governor Arthur Phillip did nothing wrong, holding up placards with the Australian flag. They also got moved on for breach of the peace after a 10-minute back and forth. And there's Avi Yemeni being arrested there. He got taken away during his confrontation with yelling at racist dogs and their leader Tom Tanuki, who won the Unshackled Regressive of the Year award because, Tom Tanuki, he was eager to win it because he
very proud of himself.
Yeah, he linked to it on his social media, and so he easily won. So it was definitely well deserved. I won't go into some of Tom Tanuki's more embarrassing moments there, but you can watch the video there on Avi's YouTube channel. This is how I got arrested on Australia Day. Both Neil and Avi, they're exploring legal avenues to try and challenge this breach of the peace move on. And even though the established media conservatives don't have much time for them, Andrew Bolt, he did link to the video saying, even though I don't really like Neil Erickson, he should be able to stand in the middle of Melbourne on Australia Day with an Australian flag. That's his free speech. And Tom Elliott on 3AW today, he decried Victoria Police arresting Avi Yemeni. So it did get a bit of mainstream attention, and both videos have got over 100,000 views. And there's a lot of people who probably aren't familiar with Neil or Avi, but just seeing this and think that's outrageous. And basically,
it's definitely good coverage.
The Melbourne CBD is the last fortress of the Invasion Day, abolish Australia Day, or it's now Abolish Australia. They're basically granted by Victoria Police and by extension the Victorian government the Melbourne CBD on Australia Day to protest against the day. As I said in my article on this, Flinders Street Station, Federation Square, iconic Melbourne Australian landmarks, you should be able to be proud to be Australian. I mean, sure, you're allowed to have the Invasion Day protest, but they should be confined to the Victorian Parliament House. They shouldn't be allowed to go through the Australia Day parade route, because in 2018, that tiny Sonia Williams, she yelled in the faces of Australia Day parade attendees saying shame, and a lot of them were new Australians, people of Chinese, Indian and other Asian ethnicities, obviously excited to be in the Melbourne CBD on their new nation's national day, and they've got this woman yelling, "No, you should be ashamed of this country, ashamed of being here."
And that's the kind of thing that a breach of the peace offence would be more appropriate for as well.
Yeah, but there's lots, there's thousands of them, and there's less of the police on that day. So basically, sure. the police, Victoria Police's view is that to stop these lefties going feral and forming into an angry mob like they did last Australia Day with Ricky T, we've just got to remove these people. And the Invasion Day protest this year, they didn't get much mainstream media coverage or sympathetic media coverage, apart from the ABC, SBS, NITV, the Indigenous broadcaster, and 3CR, which is the local communist radio station in Melbourne. They had a live broadcaster from Invasion Day, Melbourne. Notice how all of those outlets I just mentioned, they probably couldn't survive without government funds or government licenses.
That's the ticket, isn't it? I suppose to wrap up the Australia Day and Waitangi Day news at the moment, although we'll have more on Waitangi Day next week and the week after, I suspect, is David Seymour of the ACT Party did some great marketing this past week, and he's going to have an event on the day called Make Aotearoa Great Again. So that's using the Trump's MAGA slogan, but applied to New Zealand. But of course, he's using the common Maori name for New Zealand, because Aotearoa.
It makes the MAGA acronym. That's
Exactly.
the only reason why he's done it.
And that's the only reason why he's done it. And he's managed to upset so many people on the left and on the right as well, because people on the right don't like to use the name Aotearoa for New Zealand. And then the people on the left were very offended that he would use their sacred name in association with Trump.
Yeah, the joys of being a libertarian politician.
Exactly. So it's I thought it was some brilliant marketing, and I'm glad somebody finally did it. It's been suggested, actually, it's basically been suggested since 2016, and somebody's finally gone and done it. So I'm very happy with that. I see some people in the chat already, very sad. I will laugh about it. I think it's great. I think it's beautiful.
I prefer the other MAGA 2020 Make Arden Go Away, which September 19th. That's when. And there's also going to be 2 referenda questions being held in conjunction with the election, obviously, to save money. It's going to be on the euthanasia bill and legalizing recreational marijuana.
That's right. So we basically have the 3 elections, and the polls currently show everything being really very tight in terms of who will form the government. So the options currently look like either National and ACT in a coalition together, or Labour and the Greens in a coalition together. And we'll see that tighten up as the election progresses. The polls are in favour of euthanasia. It looks like that will pass in its current form. But actually, marijuana is not looking good. The cannabis polls are showing that cannabis legalization will actually lose as it's currently going. So that's the way those are the current projections, but that's going to change.
If they do both pass and Jacinda Ardern is re-elected, you can stone yourself to get away the sorrow that she's going to be Prime Minister again for another 3 years, or then there's the euthanasia option if you just can't handle it anymore.
Yeah, well, that's basically it's the ultimate black pill New Zealand election, basically. So we'll see how depressed people get coming up for it. So it's conservatives versus drug addicts. That's basically the way it's going. So yeah, that's all the election news really coming into the year. But that's the campaigning is really going to kick off. So.
And Jacinda Ardern, she's still proceeding with the gun confiscation and control legislation, and you reported yourself on the BFD, Right Minds, and also on the Unshackled that you were one of the first targets.
That's right. The amnesty ended near the end of December. It was actually the last show that we did. We talked about the numbers, and there have been some theories floated by people that my analysis of those numbers is what made me a target. We don't know anything at this point. Everything's speculation, so I'm not going to speculate any further. But I am following up all of the avenues to actually get answers. But the police at this point won't actually tell me anything. So basically, not much more I can say there, I'm afraid. But with the amnesty over, the police said they'd start raiding people for their semi-automatics. But of course, they tried to raid me for a .22 caliber lever action rifle, as I posted, one that I didn't have anymore. And they were hoping to find it, I suppose, with an unmodified tube magazine that could fire more than 10 rounds. That's what they were looking for. and or anything else they could get lucky with, perhaps. And yeah, that's not very nice. And that is hopefully, well, I would think that would be illegal. I'm hoping that is illegal action on behalf of the police, and that's something that I'm following up. And I don't know very much more about any other raids that they may have done, but I suspect that they will be finding people with firearms, especially the semi-automatics, because, like I said in my analysis, they only recovered about 13 to maybe 17% tops. So the compliance rate was really low, and we told them this, going into it. Everyone said, well, not everyone, but I should say the people on the right and conservatives and gun owners in general, left, right, and center, were saying, if you don't do this right, this is going to be an absolute disaster. And they completely ignored all of the professional and expert advice that they got from the firearms community, and the entire thing ended up being, a disaster. And it looks like maybe that's why they picked me, which is like speculation at this point.
Yeah. And it wasn't an exaggeration to call them the jackbooted thugs of the government, because it was quite a large police presence at your family home with your wife and kids.
Yes.
You wrote that it was the police presence. It was like you were cooking in a meth lab.
Well, yeah, I made that comparison, but we had about 12 officers turn up, and people said to me that's a lot. So that's not very usual. So yeah, again, not completely sure what they were expecting or what they had been told to expect. Of course, I don't have anything against the officers themselves, who were whatever they were briefed on. Hopefully, we'll find that out one day. But clearly, they thought they would find something, and that's quite. Somebody says here 7% return of military-style firearms. No, it was 13 to 17% of semi-automatics, and the military-style semi-automatics, which was a special category, was about 60% or so. But there were only, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think 17,000 of those. But there were probably about 200, up to 200, well, 200, at least 200,000 centre-fire semi-automatics in New Zealand. Yeah.
And your article on the various platforms that it was on, it went super viral, and it actually got a lot of mainstream attention as well. I noticed that New Zealand public radios called you far right. That's the go-to.
Yeah, so it was picked up by Radio New Zealand, which is commonly just simply referred to as Red Radio. And they're, again, publicly funded communist radio, essentially. Well, they don't call themselves communists, but that's what they are, and everybody knows it. And they ran with that far-right headline, trying to tie me to all of the horrible people, because that's basically, calling somebody a fascist and a white supremacist. That's what they tried to tie me to. And they ran with those headlines, and it quickly turned out that, thankfully, they got a lot of backlash for that. I had a lot of people say to me, basically everyone who talked to me said, I'm really sorry about this raid. And nobody said to me, like, I saw that they called you something nasty. Well, a few people did say that, but nobody believed them. And they backpedaled that pretty quickly. The next day, they were simply referring to me as a right-wing activist, as they were, copped a lot of backlash. So it was quite, at least that aspect was heartwarming to see that people were providing a lot of backlash to the, what obviously false claim that the media was making.
I did notice that there was one New Zealand, I guess you could call him some Antifa blogger. Are you happy for me to show the thread?
Yeah. If you want to show the thread, let's go. We can go through that. Since I don't know if you said he was a New Zealander. Is that I don't recognize him, so maybe somebody in the chat will.
It will say, so his name is Byron C. Clark. I think it's about time to look at some more of Dieuwe du Bois' associates. Content warning for this thread because the Christchurch shooter will be mentioned. You're a frequent guest on the Australian alt-right podcast, The Unshackled Waves. Yes, you have been on that podcast a few times, but it ceased production in September last year. So obviously,
and I'm not sure if it was ever an alt-right podcast per se. Of course, it was your podcast, but I thought it was supposed to be a libertarian show.
And so then the next tweet he's got when this is from the September 11, 2018 episode where I wore the Pinochet did nothing wrong shirt. He was, of course, the Chilean military general who led the September 11, 1973 coup against the communist president Hollande, and basically saved the nation from being a socialist hellhole, and instituted free market reforms with the assistance of Milton Friedman and Chicago School of Economics, made it the richest country in Latin America, and eventually it transitioned back to democracy. For all of the accusations that he was genocidal maniac, his regime only led to the death of 3,000 communists. Obviously, 3,000 people dying, that's bad, but you have to remember that the country was in a civil war situation, and obviously when there's a civil war situation, lives are lost. Obviously, 3,000 people dying is tragic, but Pinochet probably saved a lot more lives by not putting a stop to the Hollande's communist socialist experiment.
And of course, this is a meme shirt, and whatever Tim decides to wear is I'm not sure what that has to do with me as well.
So then it goes down here. He says that my collar says right wing death squad, which obviously that's the nickname for Pinochet's. Taking care of communists. It's as Nick Fuente said, it's irony, bro.
And what have we got here as well?
The guy that I started the Unshackled with, Sukith Fernando, he was confronted at his Sydney University campus, where he said that he didn't know whether the Holocaust happened. We parted ways after that, but we've been drifting apart for a number of months. I sort of explained the whole thing on the Uncuckables last week with James Fox Higgins. As you can see there, he was a white supremacist. Can you see his face there?
Yes, I can tell you that that's the whitest face I've ever seen, and it's also pretty. I think the accusation here, I believe, is that we disassociated ourselves from Holocaust deniers. I believe that's the crime we have committed here.
And it's actually the day after International Holocaust Remembrance Day, because it was, yesterday was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp by the Soviet Union Red Army in Poland.
And the New Zealand government has been in the news for that this past week because they didn't actually send anybody to the 75th commemoration. And many other, basically every other government, every other Western government and many other countries, including Australia, sent delegates there. And New Zealand made the excuse that somehow the Israelis couldn't handle the security for a New Zealand delegate. Some sort of pathetic excuse like that they gave.
So if, say, the Hamas or Hezbollah, they were going to launch an attack on this day, they target of all people a representative of Jacinda Ardern's New Zealand government.
That was basically the claim, and then they kind of walked away from it, and they issued some statements and appeared at other places. I believe Jacinda did appear at an event in Auckland, but they did not send a delegate to Israel for the commemorations.
We'll keep going with this tweet thread. So it mentions that, I've interviewed Blair Cottrell, Australia's most well-known patriot activist. This was when he was a member of the Lads Society at their then clubhouse in Melbourne. Then it goes on that Brenton Tarrant donated money to the United Patriots Front and called Blair Cottrell Emperor. Apparently, if some random person at the time says something nice about you and they turn into a homicidal maniac, you're then responsible for their actions. That's how it works.
And all of the people, because apparently I don't know who, I've never met Blair Cottrell or spoken with him. You've mentioned him a few times on the show, obviously, but anyway, apparently there's some kind of association by 3 or 4 degrees at this point.
Yeah. This is just, I think, the 3rd or 4th degree, because we then go further down here where Tom Sewell, who's the leader of Lad Society, Blair Cottrell's not a spokesman for them anymore. He said that when Tarrant was living in Australia, he tried to recruit Tarrant before he went to New Zealand, and obviously started planning to do the horrific act that he did. So that's the I spoke to Tom Sewell briefly at the 2018 Aussie Pride Flag March for about 30 seconds. That's all that he's been on my channel or media. And then it says at the end, does your average conservative family man regularly appear on a podcast founded by Mario Augusto Pinochet and a Holocaust denier regularly platforms the man the Christchurch shooter idolized? Shock, emphasizing the shock horror there of his basically summation of what we both do.
And I mean, I've covered this in the past. I mean, I've written about responses to the attacks of the mainstream media for the past year about this. I've actually put it up on an interview with Spanish Bride from the BFD, where I've actually referred to all of these articles that I've written to debunk a whole bunch of these claims that these guys have made. And of course, yeah, I don't know. That's the best they could come up apparently with. Is that based on? I think you get to 8 degrees of separation between around the world, and they're at about 4 or 5. Based on somebody who you know, and I have no idea who you've spoken to, but I'm not going to be responsible for saying, oh, so and so's interviewed so and so, so and so, who knows so and so. That's obviously a bunch of garbage, and that's the best that they have.
Yeah, you do a show with me. I've interviewed Blair Cottrell, who's associated with Tom Sewell, who met with Brenton Tarrant. So that's the degrees of separation, and this is how they always work. If they can't get you on anything that you've said, then they go for guilt by association. And I've always adopted the rule that you speak for you. You should be judged on what you say. It's up to other people to explain what they've done. I mean, you don't have to explain or rationalize in any way the work or people I talk to.
Exactly, and someone in the comments has just mentioned, Joe Rogan, for instance, endorsing Bernie Sanders the other day, and there being some kind of flame storm as well about who interviewed whoever Joe Rogan interviewed, and somehow Bernie Sanders is a bad guy because of that, and so many other people. So yes, so people have interviewed lots of horrible people. That's the job of journalism, really, is to go out and to interview people, and that's something that you do in Australia in terms of talking to a lot of these people who may not be very nice. I know nothing about them, and if they're terrible people. Still, the idea that the left has is that somehow if you can sweep everything that's ugly under the carpet, then suddenly nothing bad will ever happen again. That's kind of their approach, and it does not work because that's we see terrorist attacks all over the globe time and time again, and simply ignoring problems does not make them go away.
Yeah, and this tweet thread, it went super viral. It got 18 retweets and 71 likes, and all the replies are just himself mainly.
Yeah, well, I again, I've never heard of him. I don't know who he is.
He's got 1,757 followers, so big name. You can also go to his oral historian behind Occupy Christchurch. Let's check out his Patreon while we're at it, see if anyone's supporting him. Let's see here. I guess 108 per month, not bad, but yeah. Not exactly. You'd never heard of him.
No. I feel like the name somehow sounds familiar, but I don't know. I see somebody in the chat knows him and doesn't like him and is very upset at you for mentioning his name. So you have managed to trigger someone tonight.
Okay, just because. Well, I didn't mean to. I platformed him. I gave him a platform.
You did platform him,
Yes.
and that
Yes.
should not be allowed.
Yes.
You'll have to be punished for that. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. I disavow. I disavow him.
You just. Yeah, oh, I'm very good. Okay, I'm glad to know that you disavow him.
Yeah. I don't agree with him at all.
And this is like, and this is the absolute insanity, the absolute insanity of this kind of stuff, right? It's pathetic, and I try not to worry about this. Like I said, I know who very few of these people are, thankfully, and I don't spend any time really looking into who they are because they don't bother me. They live in these little bubbles on Twitter and they talk to each other around in circles, and I'd much rather be out there in the real world working. Somebody says here, occupy equals permanently unemployed. So, that's the thing. I don't have time to go out there and occupy things, and I don't have time to waste trying to find out who people on Twitter are, because you know what, they don't really matter.
James Boom said Rogan's a stoner. Yes, his show has been known for a lot of marijuana smoking. That's why maybe he endorsed Bernie Sanders. I guess that's another argument against legalizing it in New Zealand. Don't do marijuana, kids. You'll support socialism.
And we're on time now, 10 o'clock exactly, and I think I've got a good story to close with as well.
I've still got
you've got one. Okay.
Australian politics update, because obviously the bushfires was the biggest. It should have just been a national tragedy, but there were a lot of quiet Australians donated to various charities, our volunteer firefighters, animal welfare funds. There has been a lot of criticism directed at charities such as the Red Cross for withholding a lot of donations for future relief, when people who donated, they thought it was going to go to the bushfire victims right away, and then there's 11% tied up in administrative costs, which are those annoying charity marketers and sort of that sort of thing, which we all hate. But yes, as I said at the beginning, that it's most of the online rage has been directed at Scott Morrison, but the thing is, it's also been amplified by the mainstream media as well, because a lot of them still like to report Twitter as what Australians are saying, and there's been a lot of journalists who've been really hard against Scott Morrison, in particular his office and their communications strategy. Most prominent, Peter Van Onselen, who's a political editor for Network 10 and has been hosting the project over summer, filling in for Waleed Ali, and also Samantha Meaden, who's the political editor of the New Daily. Pretty much every misstep that Scott Morrison's made, and he has made a few. I'm sure you've seen the footage of those awkward non-consensual handshakes that he made with bushfire victims. Then there was the politically authorized ad that he made outlining his government's federal bushfire recovery strategy. He's established a national bushfire recovery agency with $2 billion. There's going to be a royal commission. Scott Morrison, he said, to his credit, he hasn't ceded to the climate change activists. Said there'll be no revision to our government's climate change policies. In fact, he wants hazard reduction burns. The lack thereof, because my home state of Victoria has failed to meet its hazard reduction fuel load, managing fuel loads target. So he wants that explored in the Royal Commission as well. But the constant hounding of Morrison in every media outlet apart from the evil Murdoch empire has been reflected in the first news poll since we're listening to News Poll again, even though they got our federal election wrong. Oh damn, it's behind a paywall. But yes, the coalition is now behind 49-51, which is not I mean, it's not disastrous this time of the year, but Scott Morrison has dropped significantly as preferred Prime Minister. He's 39% compared to Anthony Albanese's 43%, and his disapproval rating is now at 57%. And he's also now dealing with what's known as the sports rot scandal, where, and this is Peter Van Onslen's commentary, where in his last podcast that he does, Peter Van Onselen, he called this scandal fucked. It was bleeped out for the podcast, but we're allowed to swear on our platform. So Bridget McKenzie, who
this is supposed to be a family-friendly show, Tim.
It's after 10 o'clock New Zealand time.
Yeah, well, that it is.
Yes, but Bridget McKenzie, she was the sports minister before the election. She's now deputy National Party leader, and she's and the agricultural minister. But before the election, she divvied up as sports minister $100 million in community sports grants, and it's been revealed by an Auditor General's report that the grants were skewed towards marginal seats at the 2019 federal election, and that it wasn't just Bridget McKenzie doing this by herself. It was, as Peter Van Onselen mentions here, the PM's office had a hand in the allegation of grants. And now normally the minister would be sacked or be forced to resign, but because she's a member of the National Party and also their party deputy, not a member of the Liberal Party. Scott Morrison is a Liberal Prime Minister. He doesn't have the authority to sack her. Basically, the National Party leader, Michael McCormack, he's seen as a weak, ineffective leader. He can't sack his deputy. The party would have to remove her, and he probably doesn't want her to go because she's a loyal deputy to him. He might then get a deputy who might threaten his leadership, such as David Littleproud or Darren Chester, who are in the lower house, who could be Nationals leader and deputy Prime Minister. And he also Scott Morrison can't sack her because she might, as Peter Van Onselen said, spill the beans about it wasn't me who did this, it was the Prime Minister's office who told me to do this and got me to sign off on this as a sports minister. And that, aside from the politics of it, the fact that we have this this community sports grants program where it's based, this is where my libertarian streak comes out, is that it's a government picking winners and losers, because all these sports clubs do grant application, and it's either up to politicians or bureaucrats. Sports Australia is a bureaucratic body which decides where they think the grant should go, but ultimately it's decided by the politicians. They decide who are worthy of funding and who misses out. I would just prefer to just have not sports grants at all, because these grants can be hundreds of thousands of dollars and other people are left with nothing. It just seems why is it the federal government's responsibility to spend this money on sports grants? And I'm not just talking about because I'm sure a lot of people would think a poor sort of football and netball club in rural Australia would be deserving of funds, but a government also subsidised the big sporting codes, the AFL, NRL, soccer, rugby, cricket, build and fund their stadiums for them. And we're a sports mad nation. It should be something that should be commercially viable without the corrupting influence of government.
That's where the easy money comes in, and that's we already mentioned the corruption. But basically, as soon as you introduce these grants, then it's ripe for people to get the money without having to show any financial benefit for it. There's this good tie in there between offering more power and giving money in exchange for it. And Yes, so I'm on board with that as well. Obviously, is so much waste that goes on. The government spends all of this money on these things that have none of its business. And if you are going to have funding for sports and so on, then that should be done at a local level. Like the local people should be funding their local sports clubs if they want to, uh, uh, rather than centralizing all of these grants and then having that power be corrupting at the very, very top.
And it's also broken in the past week that the Australian Arts Council, again,
Yeah,
the
lovely.
federal government gives the arts various funding, but and your audience will probably know who Yasmin Abdel Magid is. She came to prominence for saying on our Q&A program that Islam was the most feminist religion, and she got the whole nation aggro at her on Anzac Day when she said, "Lest we forget Manus, Nauru, Palestine, Syria, a whole bunch of things." And she was receiving.
Yep.
She was on some foreign Department of Foreign Affairs board. We helped promote her autobiography. She still got gigs with the ABC and SBS. She was some hijabi fashion show on the ABC. Well, the Arts Council, they have given her. She now lives in London. She fled Australia.
Well, she did finally a left-wing celebrity following through on their promises to leave the country. So.
But now the Australian Arts Council has given her $20,000 to move from London to Paris to study at a university there. So she's given money by the Australian taxpayer to go from
nice work if you can get it.
One European country to another European country.
Yeah. That's the way the arts funding goes, and I'm of the opinion, going back to sports and the arts and most of higher education as well, is that there need to be drastic cuts across the board, so that they don't have so much money to waste on useless things.
And
because it's basically at this point they're just looking for things to throw money at. That means they have too much of it.
Now, before we wrap it up, I interrupted you. You said you had a good yarn.
My final close here. This is related to people falsely accusing people of things, defamation and libel. The Speaker of the House in New Zealand has been Trevor Mallard. Has been sued, or rather I should say is being sued, because he claimed that there was a rapist working at Parliament. And somebody was stood down over this, and it's probably pretty clear at this case that they were in fact not a rapist, and Trevor Mallard is being taken to court over this claim, and they're seeking $400,000 in general damages and then $50,000 in punitive damages and court costs. So basically he's got nearly a $500,000 bill hanging over his head. And unless he's incredibly wealthy, he's going to not have very much fun fighting this. Although the Speaker of the House is fairly well paid, but I don't think he's got this kind of money. So there you go.
I had a brief look at the story, and he said this in a radio interview. He didn't have the smarts. If you're going to accuse somebody of being a rapist and you're a politician, do it in Parliament where you have parliamentary privilege. Not that that's a nice thing to do, to accuse somebody of being a rapist who's proved not to be, but if you want to get away with saying it, say it in Parliament.
Exactly. And of course the irony here is this was in the context of bullying and harassment. So who's the bully now, I suppose? And I do hope that Mr. Mallard gets roasted very nicely over this, and because he deserves it. Absolutely, couldn't happen to a nicer guy. And of course, hopefully, a warning to other people out there who like to defame and slander people. You never know. There are plenty of cases going on with regards to defamation, and there are plenty of things that people are saying about other people that could get them in trouble.
Is there a chance that at the general election this speaker could be Burkoed, if you get my pun?
It's it's likely that he's got a high position on the list here in New Zealand, so he will basically always get back in anyway. So only if there's a shake-up of government. If the government changes, then he's definitely toast. But otherwise, he's probably going to be sticking around. But if the court cases go badly for him, you never know what could happen.
Yep, we'll keep an eye on that. So, well, we might, we've gone overtime tonight, but it is our first episode back after a month, so, and all the audience is still here. I find that it's even when we go overtime on our various shows, the audience still stick around. There's not
Yes, clearly we're not boring everyone to tears, so that's good to know. So anyway, we'll wrap it up now because I'm going to go. It's my bedtime when we finish the show normally. So if you want to see more of me, you can go to rightminds.nz and you can give donations as well. I've had a lot of people want to pay legal costs and the other things like that. I'm not doing any fundraising for that, and I think most of that is covered at the moment with what we're doing. But you can always go to the website, and there's a bank account number there, and we definitely will take donations for that, and of course costs to keep the website up and running. But other than that, I don't get paid myself. I just do this for fun in my spare time. So that's it for me. And of course, I'm on the BFD as well. Most of my work appears there. And Spanish Bride is a wonderful editor, and she does an amazing job. And she's been really helpful as well in the past weeks, especially. And there's a recent interview that I did with her up on their website as well.
Whatever you do, if you do decide to fundraise, don't use GoFundMe.
Well, that's of course the hard part these days, is which fundraising platform is the one to use. But I don't have to worry about that at the moment. So,
and you can support the Unshackled Productions, which doesn't just include Trans-Tasman Talk, but my own program Wilmsfront, Detonation with Steel Archer, and of course the Unshackled co-produces the Uncackables with XYZ and the Rational Rise, as well as sending through super chats on programs such as this. Pork Film Club says that he sent through another super chat. It's not coming up. It's only your first super chat that came up, so try sending it again. It hasn't come through. But yes, we have a premium membership program on our website. We've had a few sign-ups over the summer, which is pleasing. The unshackled.net/membership. We also have our web donation form at the unshackled.net/donate. We have our online merchandise store at the unshackled.net/store, and we're also on subscribestar.com/the unshackled. I will be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Melbourne time, for another episode of Wilmsfront. My guest will be the 2019 Australian Patriot of the Year, Reclaim Australia activist and war veteran Scott Morland from Queensland. I'm looking forward to having a chat with him, and then after that it's Dieuwe Beltran live at 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time. She's speaking to Stephen Wells, who's a self-confessed climate denier.
And is that it for the show? I don't know if you've got anything else to say. So
I will keep visiting theunshackled.net on a regular basis. My own website, timwilliams.com. And we will see you all next Tuesday.
We'll see you next Tuesday. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Trans-Tasman Talk. To keep up with the latest real news and analysis from the Tasman nations, visit theunshackled.net and rightminds.nz.